This is the last part of frames. There'll be certain examples and a little higher level of discussions on slots today. Just to remind you, slots are the extension of the frames itself. They are synonymous to attributes. Slots can hold on multiple values if there are certain discrepancies in allocation of slots, and it's further linking with other frames where the frames can be considered as an object, then we can go for metadata analysis. That means slots within slots, or reclassifying the slots by different names. Let us begin now. There are certain inherent problems that are associated with slots. The problems are that if we want to do a few things, what are those things? Now, like it has been mentioned here, that if we want to represent these following properties in a frame, then how would my slot be helpful in doing so? What are those things? The first one is attributes such as, let's say this is an example, just an example. Point number one, attributes such as weight, age be attached and make sense. Let's say I'm having one frame or I'm having more than one frame. In that, I do have certain slots that carries the information for the weight and age. Now to correlate this difference, to correlate these two information sets that are separated via slots or even by object classes of frames, there must be a correlation. Let's say, for example, a child of 3 years of age cannot weigh more than 15 kgs. He can never be of 50 kgs, right? So there are certain constraints related to this particular example, that means weight and age. Now remember, the examples that are given here are amongst the many different kind of critical cases that may arise. Out of them, a few are listed here. Okay, I must say that these are copyrighted material from NPTEL lectures. They are lecture notes taken from IIT Kharagpur, and these are again available on NPTEL or even on SWAM portal also of MHRD. The second one, how we are going to answer to the question for the constraints on values such as age being less than 100. Let's say there is a field, that means a slot or an attribute called as age, and it can hold multiple values for that particular slot. While holding multiple values for this particular slot, where the slot defines an age, then there must be a restriction to the value that age can carry. Let's say it is very rare that an age can be above 100 or above 105, 10 or 20. Some of you can even argue that it can go up to 120. God bless us all with that. Well, so I need to put up an upper boundary for this in each and every slot or attribute within the frame, so that the constraint is always found true and is applicable on any kind of further representation techniques, right? Any default values. Let's say one of the example is by frame representation, I want to set a default value of the passing marks. Let's say I want to keep the passing marks as 30. Now anybody who's getting 29 has to fail, and anybody who's getting 29 but less than 30 will definitely fail, and I cannot pass them. The frame representation should not pass them. And if he or she is getting 30, so under any case that student must never fail because he is above 29. He's equivalent to or greater than 30 in fact to pass. So to set default values, what what kind of modifications are required in case of frame representation, and especially on slots as an object, right? Now, rules for inheritance of values such as children inheriting parents' name. How you're going to correlate, how you're going to, like we had I mean previous to this, I mean second last lecture of this, we had a genealogical tree, right? In that tree there were certain children for a particular individual. For that individual there was a spouse, and that individual had a few kids, three kids around. So how we are going to assign the same surname that the frame was carrying to its further slots, or in fact slot values, right? So how we are going to put up this rule of inheritance there? These are to be answered. And the next one is rule for computing values. Until now, we are only representing things. Representing means something is there and we are just representing it in a high level structured format, right? So now, what should happen when a question is asked about certain kind of computations? Now, here I'd like to draw your attention towards one of the fact that um, in case of our databases also, we had a few queries for computation, like the sysdate, or in fact the age of an individual from his birth date to the present day. We calculate for how many years he or she has been alive, and from there we calculate the age, or sometimes we can even add certain values like a and b also, right? Likewise, rules for computing values are also to be answered, and for that the slots as an object will be providing us the solution for that. Now, many values for a slot. How we are going to handle many values for a slot? Check. Now let us proceed gradually. Let me tell you that there will be a section, a very small section. It's a little critical also. I'll be leaving it for you as a homework there. Now, a slot is a relation that maps from its domain of classes to its range of values. We have known about what are domains and what are ranges. So the range and domain for a slot can be calculated in this way. Now the relation is a set of ordered pairs. We know what are ordered pairs. So one relation is a subset of another. These are some assertions that they are making. Since the slot is a, now here, since the slot is a set, the slot is a set, and the set of all slots can be represented by a meta class called as slot. So what I actually want to say is slot is a class, right? Which, that means it is a frame which comprises of a set of slots, right? Here the frame name is also slot, as well as the slot names are also now given a name as slot, being a subclass, all right, or a meta class. Let us consider the following now. We are having a frame called slot. It is a set, that means it is an is a part. It is a set of the bigger class, that means the class itself, and it belongs to, that means it is a part of class, that means this is an instance, right? For domain, range, range constraint, definitions, default, to compute, and single valued, there will be no values, because when the slot when the slots slot will come up gradually below, we'll be putting up values for these fields too. Now within the slot, another frame, within the slot there is another frame, we call it as coach. Coach's instance, coach doesn't belongs to a group here, it does have only an instance. Coach's instance is a slot. Now slots are used to handle what? Now they are used to handle constraints. Now here for coach the constraint is that the domain is rugby team, and there is a range also. That means he or she must be a person, right? There is a range constraint also that has been provided, and default values in a single value it is true. That means there will be only one coach. Next comes another frame, that is color. Its instance is again a slot, right? And its domain is physical object. And its domain is physical object. Its range is color set. Color, since the frame is color, though its slots will have a constraint of range. The range is what? Now there is a set of colors that will be available. Single valued? No, it cannot be single valued. False, because it is a colorful one. So we'll be having multiple colors here. So these are the constraints that you can see. Now team colors. Again, it is an instance that belongs to slot. Remember, all the slot within slot are clubbed up under the meta class of slot. That's why team colors are also an instance of slot. Colors are also an instance of slot. Coach is also an instance of slot, and obviously slot is also an instance of class, right? Now comes the position. Position again is an instance of slot. Domain is rugby player. Range is what? Now back, forward, and reserve to compute. And again, a single valued true, right? There are certain things to be noted out here. What? Now, instances of a slot are slots. Obviously, we have declared it or we have shown it while construction of the frames before. Second point is, associated with slot are attributes that each instance will inherit. It is there because we have assigned all the instances to which each and every frame member within the main principal class of slot is present, right? Now each slot has a domain and a range. Here I'll not be showing you how to calculate it. Range is split into two parts. The first class belongs to the elements and the other class belongs to the constraint. Now if there is a value for default is present, then it must be passed on unless an instance has its own value. Now there are a few more points, you can skip it off. While interpreting frames, you have to remember that the frame system interpreter must be capable of the following in order to exploit the frame slot representation. How does frame slot representation work? Now by consistency checking. Point number one is consistency checking. Next one is the propagation of definition. The third one is inheritance of default. The fourth one is computation of the values of a slot as needed, and the fifth one is checking that only correct number of values are computed. After this, we do have access paths. How to generate access paths? You have to go through the access path definitely, because I'll be putting up questions in my assignment from this access path also. Now these are representations. Remember, I have taught you predicate logic. This is basically predicate calculus, right? So there are some of the things which you have to study of your own. So this part you'll be going through the representation of the access paths, right? It's a very small part up to this. Now there are a few questions that are to be answered. Let us begin with the questions. The first question is, we have to construct a semantic network representation for the information given below. You need to have what? You need to have a semantic net representation. What? Now, for which part? There are two parts, A and B. The first part is, Richard Nixon is a Quaker and a Republican. Richard Nixon is a Quaker and a Republican. Quakers and Republicans are persons. The first set of information that was given to you was Richard Nixon is a Quaker and a Republican. Quakers and Republicans are person, and every Quaker follows the doctrine of pacifism. Let me say you some more things about this. Like, read the sentence once again. Richard Nixon is a Quaker. That means Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is a part or belongs to, not set wise. That means it is an instance. It holds an instance. Richard Nixon holds an instance of a Quaker as well as a Republican, right? Whereas Quaker and Republican are persons. That means this is a part. Quaker and Republican is a part, and every Quaker follows the doctrine of pacifism. This is not the case of instance or even set representation, right? So to make out a proper semantic net for this, so remember, we are here not drawing the frames, we are making out the semantic net representation for this. So let us see how it is done. We are having Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is a member of two things, the Republican and the Quaker. The Republican and the Quaker. Secondly, Republican and Quaker are subset of what? The persons. They both, that means Republican as well as Quaker, is person. So Richard Nixon holds an instance of Republican and Quaker, and Republican and Quaker is a subset of the persons. Now this whole part, that means Richard Nixon, who is a person and who's a Quaker as well as a Republican. So every Quaker whom a Quaker follows follows the doctrine of pacifists. Here I don't have an instance and neither I do have a set in case of semantic net representation, right? Let us go through the next question. So construct the semantic net representation for the following information. In B part we do have Mary gave the green flowered vase to her cousin. Mary gave the green flowered vase to her cousin. Now remember how you are interpreting this sentence, it matters a lot. Let us read the sentence once again. Mary gave the green flowered vase. So the flowered vase is having green flowers. Is it one of the interpretations? Yes, but it is not true. To somewhat reduce the complexity here, or in fact, if you read it a little slowly, you'll understand. Mary gave the green flowered vase, right? A green colored flower vase to her cousin. So this is the correct way of interpreting the meaning of this question. Now what I have to do with this small statement? I have to construct a semantic network representation for the following information given below. Let us see. So Mary gave the green flowered vase to her cousin. We are having an object, right? We are having an object of green flowered vase. That means a flowered vase with a color green. Mary being a person and her cousin being another person. So Mary gives and the recipient is who? Recipient of the object, that means green flowered vase, will be the cousin, right? Here. Mary is having the event 1, that means the first event. There are certain examples like this in our third last lecture, right, when we were talking about semantic nets almost 6 days back, 5 days back in fact. So Mary in an event 1 is the giver to a person 1 and object 1 that is a green flowered vase. Green is a color. Object's instance is a vase, and object's texture is flowered, right? So Mary gives an object 1, that is a green flowered vase, to the recipient, that means person 1, who's nothing but the cousin, right? So this is the semantic net representation of Mary gave green flowered vase to her cousin. So let us see once again. Mary, there is an event 1 and there is a person 1. There is an object also. So object holds an instance of vase, and object holds a texture of flowered, and object is having a color of green. So Mary gives, giving is an event 1, object 1 to recipient, that is person 1, who is a cousin, right? Now consider the following hierarchy of frames you have been provided with. So computer users, and this is a hierarchy, right? Hierarchy map that has been given. You have to give the class precedence list of ME that would be obtained by applying the topological sorting algorithm to the above graph. Topological sort, you know. Frame representation, you know. I completely do agree that this is a little critical question, but try to go through it. I'll be putting this whole of the lecture video as well as the lecture material. Kindly go through it and answer to the assignment questions immediately after that. Thank you once again.